Welcome everyone to the May 27th, 2025 meeting of the planning board. Though we have the option of being online, I don't think any committee member is, so we do not need a roll call vote to get going. And with that, I will mention that it is the last official meeting of two of our members, which is good for you guys. It was a pleasure to have you here.
On every word right there.
No, it's just, I was trying to phrase it in a way of like, no, no, you guys have been great and really, your contribution has been amazing and we will miss you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
With that, I will move on to the first item of administrative business, which is public comment, which public comment is limited to up to 15 minutes, with no more than 3 minutes allocated to any one speaker. And public comment is limited to items which are not on the agenda. Does anyone in the room have a comment or anyone online? You can feel free to raise your hand. If not, we will move on to the second agenda item, which is the 77 Walden Street recommendation of the ZBA.
Senior planner Christine Zale is online, and I think Christine will start off.
So they are doing work within the 100-year floodplain for a rear deck at the back of the property. They received approval from the Natural Resource Commission on their plans dated April 25th, and that was at their May 14th meeting. And engineering has reviewed the plans on it as well. It's an extremely small floodplain alteration, and the compensation proposed or shown far exceeds the filled area. So there are no concerns from engineering on it. And so it is recommended in the report an approval or recommendation to the ZBA by the planning board.
I do know that applicant's engineer is also online if the board would like him to go through the project, if there's any questions.
No.
Awesome. So we would need, we need.
So this is just a recommendation for a special permit to the zoning board of appeals. And then it would be consistent with the senior planner's report and the recommended conditions of approval.
Do we have a motion for that?
So moved.
Seconded.
Then all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Nope. Okay, so that's unanimous. Perfect. Easy.
Thank you, George.
The next item we have is the zoning bylaw amendments, planning board recommendations is the next item.
And I do know that Mike Lawson, the chair of the EBC, is online and would like to provide comments to the board regarding Article 44.
Exactly.
I'm getting my article numbers mixed
I
up.
bet.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well enough?
Yes.
Great, thank you. First, I'd like to thank the board and Elizabeth for all the help they provided as the EVC sort of wandered into this zoning bylaw business, perhaps a little bit naively about the complications of all of them. In any event, I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of that article. I know that the planning board is weighing the balance between the positive impact it may have on the permitting process and costs associated with a new business coming to Concord against the potential increase in traffic, particularly as it might affect those residents who live near the business districts. I hope you will agree that the EVC has tried very hard to recognize those concerns as we move first to eliminate the residential component of the article, and second, to restrict the article to new businesses coming in without any change in either the square footage or the square usage of the facility. So my view is that we have not only worked very hard, but if I look at this article, in a straightforward way, I think it will help new businesses coming to Concord, and it's very hard for me to see how it would lead to increased burden on the neighbors around the business districts. So I hope that when the planning board comes to make a recommendation, they too will balance these two competing issues and come to the same conclusion I did. And again, thank you very much for all your help in helping us move this article through the various amendments we made into town meeting. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
So at the last meeting, the board had discussed each one of the articles and, whether to recommend affirmative action, no action, such as Article 46, the board deferred their recommendation to town meeting, knowing that the petitioner was working with the select board. And then the board asked regarding this article. There was obviously not a consensus on affirmative action or no action. I did get input from town council on the board taking no position on the article. And that is, a valid option for the planning board to do. It's not one that I'm aware of, the board ever taking, but it is a valid option. I guess the example town council gave me is in some communities, the planning board does not make a recommendation for affirmative action or no action. They just remain silent. And after 21 days after the public hearing, they are not required by law to provide a recommendation. Town meeting can move forward with whatever action town meeting makes. So that's what some communities do, but so his comment was the board can vote to take no position.
Why has it never been done before? I guess I'm a little surprised. They've always taken either a positive or a negative.
That I'm aware of, yes.
Okay.
I can't say why, but
And if we took no position, can we offer the explanation, like as it's written in the
yes.
agenda amendment of like, no position and this is what it means and this is why we're
Yes.
doing it, yeah.
So, should the board still wish to, either defer your recommendation to town meeting or actually vote tonight to take affirmative action, no action, or no position. For no position, you can provide an explanation, and that will be given to the town moderator, who will, at the beginning of the article, read the recommendation for town, from the planning board.
I guess the easiest way to start is, do we generally have a consensus? Like, I know that people have thought about this. We didn't exactly voice our opinions, yay or nay last time, but it seemed that there was at least some split. And maybe the easiest way is to just say whether we are for or against it, and whether this is even a discussion we're tiptoeing around that we need to have. If everyone's against it or everyone's for it, that's fine.
So generally with any of your recommendations to town meeting, so all the other articles where you've already voted, it says, recommended unanimously,
Mhm.
or if the board has a split, that split vote would also be included.
I personally would be inclined, if we are actually splitting our positions, to vote that way and report the split. I mean, we're the planning board, we're only citizens, but we do have a certain level of expertise, and I personally feel it's our job to advise the town as best we can, and if we show a split, then the town will realize, well, we don't all agree, we don't all have the same opinion, and the town can take that as advice, but that's just my personal opinion.
And the town historically hasn't been shy about disagreeing with boards. Boards have, you know what I mean? It's just, it's not, I'm not under any illusion of how much weight a recommendation really carries at
It
the
is
end of the
hardly
day.
overriding.
Yeah,
Could I make one more small remark?
oh, sure, go ahead.
I would hope you would have a recommendation for town meeting. Zoning articles are always complicated and difficult, and you folks know more about these issues than anyone else who's going to be at town meeting. I hopefully, of course, would want you to support this article, but I am absolutely convinced that you should provide some guidance to the town. We've done what we can to balance the competing issues here, but I think for the planning board, I would hope you don't come to the conclusion of just having no recommendation for the town. I think your voice is too important to this process. Thank you.
I think what Mike's group has tried to do is applaudable, okay? I understand what they're trying to accomplish, you know, I've met with them outside of the meetings, you know, because of the whole parking situation, okay? My concern is that it doesn't have any control over the switching of businesses, okay? And yes, they say it's the same size and all that, but it makes me uncomfortable to give carte blanche to switching businesses without us having to have some input on it. My 2 cents. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay,
definitely sure.
and I don't want to stand in the way of what they're trying to accomplish, because, you know, that's good for the town, okay, but I think we also need to have some guardrails in there, and that's part of our job, is to have some say over what transpires. And again, that's just my 2 cents.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, nothing has changed from when we discussed this at our last meeting. That the residential piece was out already,
Correct.
and it was based on just what Mike said.
Yeah.
And I know we talked a lot about this and came to this conclusion. I just wish I had a video of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, to summarize briefly, and I'm probably speaking for other people, so I don't wanna step if anyone has any good recollection, but it basically came down to the competing interests of, you know, business change and development, lowering the barriers of entry versus, as Mark said, the lack of control. In the sense, not control as in the town controls what's put in, but controls certain conditions around what happens when things go in. My recollection was, you know, changes were made, and again, it's not a positive example from a business development perspective, because I know, when, the coffee shop over there went in on Main Street, and it was a whole 10-month ordeal for them to get approvals. There were significant changes that they conceded. You know, it had to do with staffing, how they were gonna, you know, because originally I think they were gonna make things on site, and it was gonna have more of a commercial kitchen than it was, you know, now it's a smaller coffee, you know, there was a back and forth with the town about what was appropriate, what was an appropriate use of town resources for that business. And I have gone back and forth with this a lot, I'll admit this, because in my mind, if you know, what was the store? The Fat Face went out and something else is coming in. The format of that location isn't large enough to make a significant difference. That's my opinion. You know, you have these
Right.
small one-off things that doesn't matter. The problem is the way this is written. If the bookstore went out and became a sit-down restaurant, all of a sudden they're gonna have 10 staff members there for prep during the day. So all of a sudden they're using 10 parking spots, they're parked there all day, they're not, you know, it's like a different, you know, 3 bookstore employees who are filtering in and out is a different use of what is a public resource. And if you're saying you're relying on public parking to handle whatever happens, the public has to have some sort of say in that. And it can't all be, you know, the expectation that the public is going to absorb that, whether it's the public in the sense of maintaining these parking lots, which are now, you know, dealing with your staffing issues and all of that, or, you know, parking on Middle Street. I mean, these are public roads, and I think parking on them is perfectly valid, but at the same time, should that be the private benefit without any public say? And that's what I keep running into. And part of me wants to be like, yes, just let it happen, but the other part is saying it's a public road, the public should have a say. So that's where I kind of sit.
I mean, the concern is gonna be the restaurants. I mean, that's basically any other business that goes in is not gonna be an issue. It's really, like you said, it's the restaurants because they're gonna drive more employees, more patrons, and a lot more traffic. Now, that being said, say half the stores that are commercial, just, selling retail items are gonna go out of business and become cafes or restaurants. I doubt that. I think our biggest concern is the bookstore because of the size of that area, right? Besides that, everything else is pretty small. They're under 1,000 square feet, so they're not gonna be bringing in hundreds of people per day, versus a sit-down restaurant of that size. If it were to happen, like look at where Paparazzi is now, you're gonna have a Starbucks, the pizza place, Chipotle and a bank, it's gonna,
Mhm.
that, you can see where that lot is gonna be fuller than, it was with Paparazzi, so. But that's my only concern. I think, I'm all for trying to make things easier for businesses to come in, not take 10 months to open up a business, because that's just not, if that's gonna happen, all we're gonna be changing it, steering it to is gonna be chains.
Mhm.
Because they're the only ones that are gonna have the capital to be there for 10 months to wait to open up versus, someone who's trying to open up a business locally.
I don't think it's necessarily limited to restaurants. What about if, one of those, real estate turned into a gym? Okay, they could pack a lot of people into one of those places, okay? And I don't know that, but yeah, certainly restaurants are a good example because it requires a lot of seating, a lot of people and stuff like that. And yeah, the bookstore, that would be very difficult if that switched to a restaurant. You could put a lot of tables in there, a lot of seats, and at parking spot for every 3 seats, it would require a lot of parking spots. But anyway.
I've gone back and forth about this myself a lot because I do see the pros and cons of both sides, and I'm going to state a different opinion than we've heard so far tonight, which is that even with all of the possible detriments, I think it's more important to vote in favor of this on grounds of making it easier to keep the business district vital. And I will note that a lot of places around the country are going to no parking requirements at all, which we are certainly not doing. So this is a less extreme, more controlled change than that. Overall, I think it's to our benefit for various reasons, even though I recognize the detriments, the possible detriments.
Thank you, Sue. That kind of helped me think about this in terms of a kind of the risks and the benefits of this proposal. And it just seems to me that logically the risk is that I'm not even sure I see the risk. There's plenty of places for people to park in Concord. They may have to walk to get to where they're going.
Well, the
Um,
risk is that they could have to walk further, and the risk is that they would park in legal public parking spaces along residential streets, which I will note are legal.
But that's
parking
legal.
places.
I mean, that's
Mm.
legal. And so I guess I think I'm leaning in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, the way you phrase it, it's a public parking policy question more, because no matter what goes in, they're not building any more parking. So it's ultimately how you manage the resource you have. This is again, why I keep waffling on it too, is I don't know what to say.
And I want to be clear, when I say risks, if this passes at town meeting, I'm sure that there will be a case of a business that changes hands to a more intensive use that has a greater call for parking. But I think that the benefits of having that new business would be greater. Not that I think it's possible we might have no changes in parking. I think there would be, but it would be worth it for that, to the town overall.
Yeah, I mean, you see the number of people who are going into Helen's and things like that, which is an intense use, a lot of people in a very small space. But it is what helps make the downtown vital versus I'm sure neighbors would love more realtors because that means there's less pressure on the parking. you know, these are, you know, just ground floor billboards.
Maybe, maybe not.
Lexington, all realtors and
All
banks.
realtors and banks, yeah, I mean, Lexington has a moratorium on banks, I think, even because they have too many, but,
But I do think
But-
recognizing the stress of, you know, I would disagree, and I think a lot of people at town meeting might disagree with the idea that there's not a parking problem.
I'm sure there, I'm sure there.
Be careful how you voice that.
I will say that we also have to weigh the stress of, there have been plenty of times that I have been in the center, driven around twice, and then abandoned my plan to either go to the bookstore or whatever, because there wasn't parking available. And I said, maybe I'll try tomorrow. So there is something to be said for the fact that it is a limited resource. If we stress it, even in for an acceptable purpose or, you know, an important purpose, that there is a trade-off that's then made, that if we, you know, there's a change in use and there's an increase in parking stress, and that actually could negatively impact other businesses as well. So this is why I go to the point of like, this is a robust debate and discussion. This is the type of thing that is perfect for town meeting, because you have the community as a collective that says, we gotta hash this out, and you'll have people speak on both sides of it and then come to a decision. I'm happy to take a vote and report where our division is.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's really any benefit to that, cause I think people
Well,
kind of.
I think there is, because you are voicing an opinion. And it's not, you're not even really saying. Yeah, I mean, the answer, yeah. Yeah, it's.
I guess, I
Yeah,
think it's totally fine. I don't think our split vote or non-vote will actually
No,
really sway the community.
There'll
in
still be a
in
robust discussion.
That's
at town
that's
meeting.
my thing,
No
'cause I think this
question
is
about
still going to
that.
be a
yes,
intensive discussion.
And I think to Mike's point, that because theoretically, and being, still feeling very much like a newbie on this committee, this committee has some experience, those of you who've been on for a long time, with wrestling with these problems and these questions. So I think it's incumbent upon the committee to, even if the committee says we're split right down the middle, or we, you know, it was, you know.
Because I'm on both sides.
Yeah. So then that gives the, as you said, that gives the rest of town meeting an insight into this was, you know, something we really need to.
This
wrestle
isn't a
with.
no-brainer. It's not a.
This is not a
in
no-brainer.
either direction.
And it sends a better, this is complicated message if we take a split vote than if we say, yeah, we're just gonna
Pass this one.
hide.
You know, I mean, we can vote, even people who are gonna vote yes, no, there are detriments to this, and the people who are gonna vote no, there are still positives to this passing, so it's just. I think, you know, we vote and we give our explanation and kind of move on, and, you know, it's not binding, you know, it's just, yes, it's an opinion.
Yeah.
okay.
You know, I didn't mean to say I don't think there's a parking problem. I realize there is, but there's just other problems too, and it's all which is more important. And it's very
the balancing act,
complicated
Yeah.
yeah.
and hard to
Just the
decide.
lesser of two evils.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
angels
So,
can dance on
I
a pen?
don't, I don't think whichever way we vote, anyone, we will make a dent in the parking issue of the Concord, so.
I'm
You know,
Because I wanna stress that I don't think it's necessarily a zoning bylaw issue.
Yeah.
No.
You're talking about a public parking resource,
Mhm.
that needs to be effectively managed.
Yeah.
I also think some people could use walking a little bit further, because I know everyone's complaining about parking, but if I park near Thoreau, I can walk over to downtown, no problem. I've always had parking down there, other than big event days. So, I don't know, that's just maybe me.
And that, I think, is the sort of the philosophical and gut
Yeah, the
feeling. of all,
availability
you know.
might be different than convenience.
Yeah.
That's ultimately, it's how you
Yeah.
feel,
Yeah.
a lot of what parking is. But if downtown's
Not to
empty.
dismiss the difficulty of having to
Oh,
change your
ego,
plan, or you gotta pick up a kid and you.
Just have to
You
back-
really wanted
yeah.
to get that loaf of wheat breaded.
tell hands, I mean, it's,
Yeah. So I guess with that, I guess we'll take a vote and we'll vote, the first will be, I guess, for affirmative action. Who is in favor of stating that they are for this change? So that's 4, and then who are opposed? Great. Great. And
Perfect.
I will happily say that there's a 95% chance I will change my mind 16 times before now and then, so it's a vote 4-3 in favor of affirmative action on the article.
And I think we should be clear about saying why.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
it really is that language that the town needs to weigh the benefits.
Right.
And potential consequences of the bylaw.
Right.
And deciding it's about, I mean, it's really the same reason we didn't wanna have a vote, or the reasons why this vote is split.
I think it's also worth saying that we seem to be in complete agreement about what the pros and the cons are. It's just we come out differently on which weighs more heavily with us.
Mhm.
And that's a message to send to
Yeah.
town meeting.
Okay, since I will need to write this up.
Can we deliver this orally, or is this like a written I don't know what the,
So at this point in time, since the briefing book has already been written and there are no handouts, this will be provided verbally at town meeting. So I don't know if the board wants.
I know from my own committee, you just need to notify the moderator.
Yeah.
And the options are for you to have your vote announced by the moderator, or to request time from the moderator to explain your committee's perspective. I know I just did that with articles that the EVC had voted on, one for no action and the other for affirmative action. We don't need any particular time, so I just asked the moderator if she would announce them from the podium. And she had already indicated at the meeting we had a couple Saturdays ago that would be her intent, to either provide some time or to just announce results from the podium.
Right, so the board will be providing its recommendation verbally, whether,
Mhm.
you know, the chair speaks, you know, your recommendation, or whether, you know, you put it in writing and provide it to the moderator to read. But so the distinction I was making is that traditionally the board writes it up, your recommendation, and it's a handout, so that's not an option. So I
Yeah.
don't know if you want to try and specifically write this out, or if you want to designate, you know, 2 members to work to draft it out for either Andrew to read or to provide to the moderator.
I'm happy to help draft it.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm gonna use the language that's in Elizabeth's planning memo, which just says the town needs to weigh the benefits and potential consequences of the amendment and decide what it values. And that's reflected in our split vote as well.
And it seems pretty simple.
I mean, yeah,
Just do that. That's-
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fine.
we would have to have the part, this is reflected on our split vote as well, because we have to explain
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
split.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I can say, the planning board voted 4-3 to recommend affirmative action. Realizing that, based on the, with a split vote. Noting that the board believes town meeting should discuss the pros and cons of the article, and that the town needs to weigh the benefits and potential consequences of bylaw amendment, deciding what it values as a community.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Well, but that just said,
we can wordsmith it, but it's
Okay.
basically our split vote,
reflects our,
our personal preferences, you know.
well,
that-
our personal thoughts about the
About-
relative pros and cons
Yeah.
on,
Yeah, that's,
or the relative strengths of the pros and cons on this article, and we believe the town should weigh, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah, I agree, yeah. We can wordsmith it a little bit.
Okay,
I don't mean to complicate your world. I heard people in talking about this article on your committee express concerns for the pros and cons. But I think I heard Mark talk about I'm paraphrasing, so I apologize, Mark, if I get it wrong, but it was essentially that independent of how you view the benefits and costs associated with it, he thought that the planning board should simply not give up control of this issue. At least that's what I thought I heard him say.
I think to give up control of the parking issue concerns me, okay? That's all.
All right, so I just suggested, that's something that if the planning board thinks it's important to get in front of town meeting, I think that too should be included in your, even though I don't like it, but, I think it should.
Well, I think we're split there as well. I personally, take the opposite side there, that I don't think that in this particular instance, we need to keep that level of control in order to bring applicants through very lengthy, expensive processes, which impact economic development.
Yeah, so maybe control is just a pro and a con rather than
Yeah.
just called out. But thank you all very much for your consideration and your help. Getting this to town meeting is greatly appreciated.
Well, we appreciate your help,
Yeah.
Mike, okay?
Okay, I will type this up. I'll send it to
Yeah.
the two of you and,
Yeah.
we just need to get it to the town moderator.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, indication is that the zoning articles, will likely come up Wednesday night. I believe there's the intention for Article 46 to be, pre-scheduled for 6:45 on Wednesday. But if they may come up Tuesday, late Tuesday, night, but.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. The next agenda item we have here is the, Article 46. And that had some edits that were distributed earlier today, so I. Turn it over.
Turn it over to Mark and Chris.
Good evening. Have you all gotten a copy of the hot off the press?
Yep.
No, I don't have a copy of it.
I haven't.
love a copy of it.
So, yeah, there's some behind you, but it was emailed to the board.
Anybody else?
I'll take it. I'm looking at it on my
I'll look-
phone. I'd rather look at it on
Oh.
paper, so
Yeah.
I don't,
I don't even
Go.
think the yellow shows up.
yeah, so I don't go blind.
So, this is a matter that we had on your plate. Remind me, March? Early March?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, there's been a lot of changes. Would you like me to walk you through the changes?
I think especially where the proposed floor amendments are new, would be
Yes.
helpful, but.
So I do want to, before Mark gets into the zoning, I do want to provide, the board an update. The select board has been meeting with the petitioner and, has met numerous times in executive session with town council to discuss a memorandum of agreement to, address those issues and concerns that have been raised, that are somewhat I'm gonna say outside the scope of what zoning should, regulate and look into. At the select board meeting, which, is happening concurrently, but at 6 o'clock, the chair, they came out of executive session, and the chair did note that the select board, has come to, an agreement on a memorandum of agreement. And the three, major points in it is, that as part of the site plan review application, should this amendment pass and, Deaconess submits a site plan application to the planning board, there would be a traffic, study and safety study. And part of that study, if it is a recommendation for safety improvements to the intersection of Ornac and Old Marlboro, that the Deaconess will contribute a proportionate share, to those improvements. This is similar to what, the Board of Appeals, and the planning board discussed as part of their recommendation. to the Novo Riverside Commons comprehensive permit. They are paying a proportionate share of improvements to the intersection of Baker Ave and Main Street. So this would be similar to that. The MOA memorandum of agreement clarifies the payment of taxes, which Deaconess currently does pay taxes, but should they ever in the future move forward for tax exempt status, they will negotiate in good faith with the select board for a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. The third is, you will notice in here that the section regarding the attainable dwellings and or health service units, which was the term and the conversation around affordable units, that has been struck. The reason for that is part of the MOA. There is now going to be a mitigation fee paid to the town to be used towards housing, healthcare, or financial security assistance for seniors in the community. This payment is $200,000 times 10% of the number of units that get approved. So if 100 units get approved, that is a payment of $2 million. It's over 10 years, with the first payment being when the lease up of the project is at 90% or after 18 months after the certificate of occupancy is issued. So those are the, main key points. And then Mark can go through for the board, the revisions to the zoning.
Elizabeth, could you just repeat what the mitigation is for? Were there specific bullets as to what they were looking to be mitigating for seniors? Was it
Housing,
housing?
healthcare, and financial security assistance.
Those are from the IRS revenue ruling from 1972, number 174. The IRS said that housing for elderly people should address those three issues, and at some cost to the institution. Obviously, you have to balance the rates you charge with the need for those people to get the services, but you don't want to have to put it on the back of the existing residents. So it's a balancing act. Actually, if it's online, if you want to read IRS revenue ruling 72-124, and it's an enlightened piece of work for the Nixon administration, I have to say.
And this fee would be paid to the town, and the town would somehow manage this fee to support
Yes.
seniors.
Yes,
And they'll tell us how they're spending the money because we have obligations to the IRS, so we want to keep track of it.
Okay. Elizabeth, what does proportionate share mean? Is that defined in the MOA, what the proportion is? Is it, based on land area or?
no, so that is purely dealing with the traffic and safety.
Oh, proportion
impacts.
of the additional, of the traffic problem
Yes.
caused, okay, got it.
Yeah, our
By traffic. And, this mitigation fee, that's $200,000 times 10% of the units over 10 years. Is that inflation adjusted or is that absolute? And so if the project is delayed, the value would drop, or don't you know?
So it is a straight flat calculation based on the number of units approved.
Okay, but, since it's paid over time, it
It
goes
is
down.
it is a flat calculation.
there's no escalation.
There's,
Right, but if you pay $100,000 this year and $100,000 in 10 years, the $100,000 in 10 years it has a lot less value.
No adjustment for that.
Correct.
No
So
adjustment.
you're not wrong.
Okay, all right, I was just checking. Thank you.
Any other questions about the terms Elizabeth has alerted you to?
You mean the changes
Just
made
what
today?
she's mentioned so far.
So I
not,
can-
I'll go,
so I can
everything
tell
else
you-
is minor in
Hold on,
comparison.
just one sec.
What I can tell you is, the select board will, this memorandum of agreement will be basically in its final form prior to, town meeting. And I imagine it would be made available prior to, town meeting. Should the warrant article pass, then the select board would execute, the agreement. If the warrant article fails, then there's no, purpose to execute the agreement.
Thank you.
You, of course, know Chris Sintrus
You
from.
guys, you don't need to stand, you can sit. The owl picks you up next week. Yes.
So I'll just walk you through the things that have changed, so those are highlighted in yellow. And a lot of this is just housekeeping, so on page one, you'll see that there's a new.
You don't know what
caption.
housekeeping is yet.
There's a caption for overlay district, which somehow got forgotten. And then there's just an additional clause to the sentence in yellow at the back end that provided in the event of a conflict between this section 712 and any other provision, the section 712 shall govern. Your lawyer and I went through a lot of discussion about trying to find things that would still apply. Some of them are referenced in here, for example, landscaping, height of the building, the way to measure the height of the building, site plan review, the actual citations to the bylaw section are in here. But it got clumsy. We certainly know that you have an earth removal and fill bylaw. We intend to comply with it. And so I don't think that they necessarily conflict. It would be something we would just do as a matter of course.
I think, to try and, move this discussion in a positive direction. So when I say housekeeping, I do know that, Sue, has for the past 2 years, gone through meticulously through the zoning bylaw and, the board has put forth 2 warrant articles, one last year, one this year, dealing with, I would say grammar, format, syntax.
Consistency.
And consistency. So I do know that both Linda and Sue have comments based on, how where commas are format, so it's consistent with the rest of the bylaw. I don't expect to go through that tonight. I think if you are willing, they would be more, I can forward their comments to you. And I believe they're both willing to, if you go through and make another round of edits before next Wednesday, that they can, provide you their comments again on that grammar, syntax,
Sure.
format, and consistency. But I think it would probably be helpful to at each one of these edits, have the board ask questions and provide comments in a substantial nature, instead of having you go through the whole thing and then come back. If that makes sense.
We just want to keep ball rolling, the moderator happy and have this approved. Because there are some changes in here that we just want a finding to be rendered that were inside the scope of the original warrant that we gave you back in March. I'm not worried about it, but I do want to have that determination made.
So I don't know, Sue has comments, but most of them.
I highlighted for myself the ones that are actually substantive,
Okay,
as opposed to the ones that are
then,
housekeeping.
Well, can we hear the substantive ones?
well, and when you get to
Okay,
them.
so there's an amendment in the section 7.12.2.2 referencing associated accessory uses. I know that the existing bylaw has a series of accessory uses, and they're more or less by principal use. For example, you have allowed accessory uses with assisted living, or and there might even be some, long-term care. The courts are no longer applying the general rule that everything you can do is gotta be in the bylaw, at least for accessory uses, for principal uses, that rule still stands. But I've had a couple of cases recently where Judge Foster and now the appeals court have said, look, we're not gonna make you list every accessory use, but if it's customary and incidental and subordinate to the principal use, you can go ahead and do it. This actually comes from a case where at a 1 million square foot marijuana grow facility, the proponent said he wanted to do manufacturing and processing as well as 850,000 square feet of grow. And we argued at the appeals court that you can't do that because it doesn't say you can do that. And that's how this all came about, so. Sometimes you lose and it actually makes more sense. On the next page. We just wanted to be clear about the definitions of certain terms that are used. There are three components in a CCRC: independent living units, assisted living units, and skilled nursing units. And so health services units are the latter two, as distinguished from an independent living unit. A multi-unit dwelling is anything over 5, and a townhouse dwelling is anything up to 4. So it could be 2, 3, or 4. And that's important because we're gonna call out in the next section, 712, for yard requirements, that townhouse dwellings are going to have no more than 3 units if they have a front yard on Old Marlborough Street. This is a concession that we made to the neighbors, and they picked this option from 2 that we offered them. So we're confident that this was something that made the majority of them at least comfortable. And the second one has the same history. Multi-unit dwellings have to be located twice the height of the principal building from Old Marlborough. So if it's a 100, well, if it's an 85-foot building, which we don't intend to build, we are hoping to get a little margin of error, if you will, for planning purposes. That would have to be 170 feet back off Old Marlborough. If it's, obviously, if it's 60 feet, it'd have to be 120 feet back off of Old Marlborough. And we think those are more realistic numbers. The side yard requirement was lowered from 40 to 30 because that's currently the rule in the zoning bylaw for side yards.
So the change is that it's 30.
Yes,
Okay, cause it looks like it's,
430.
no, it looks like it's 4 to 30 feet, that it could be anywhere between 4 and 30 feet.
No, it's 30.
That's a strike through.
Yeah, it's a story.
Got it, okay, that was hard to say.
It's
It just
hard
makes
to
the
see,
form more
yeah.
pronounced, yeah.
Yeah.
And then in the next section on height, you can see that a townhouse is not more than 35 feet and a multi-unit building will be not more than 85 feet. And there's measuring sticks in 6 to 11 of the existing bylaws, so we just use that for a reference purpose. There is an open space requirement that hasn't changed. It's 20% of the total area of the overlay district, and we assume that that will get worked out in the planning board during the course of site plan. As Elizabeth said, the attainable dwelling unit language, which really was a major focus of the negotiation with the select board and the bylaw generation over these past couple of months. It was an interesting conversation, but at the end of the day, we opted for certainty. And there's nothing uncertain about the payout that we'll be making over the next 10 years once the lease up gets to the 90% stage. And I didn't want to just leave a void there. So I added section 712(8), and that reminds you that for 53 years now, Newbury Court has been meeting its obligations under the IRS revenue ruling. And that last year you provided something around $1 million in charitable care. Not as a part of any permit or as part of any condition, just simply as a part of their obligation to the IRS for the tax exempt and nonprofit status that they had. And then the last section on site plan approval, we deleted some language about getting a waiver, and then added things that would be within the context of site plan approval, such as vehicular and pedestrian access, stormwater, site design, layout and lighting. And then there was a discussion, separate discussion on landscaping with the neighbors. So Elizabeth came up with the idea that we would take the sentence from the landscaping section, which is 6.2.9, and just repeat it in the bylaw so that everybody understood what the standard would be. And that's the language in the 3 or 4 lines in yellow. Maybe Chris could give you a brief summary of conversations that he had with the neighbors, because we had most of them.
I think the board should go through and ask its questions, it seems.
Should I go or does
Yeah,
someone
yeah,
else want to?
you can go.
All right, so first of all, the term independent living units is not defined anywhere in here, anywhere. Okay, second of all, I was looking at the yard requirements in 7.12.4. Now, you say, for townhouse dwelling, provided that no townhouse dwelling with a front yard on Old Marlborough Road shall contain more than 50 units. Now, this is a question for you, Elizabeth. I'm not 100% sure how this works. A corner lot, has 2 front yards, correct?
Right, so that
But is
would
there,
be more appropriate for that to say no townhouse dwelling with frontage on Old Marlborough Road.
okay, but I'm also, this is at the moment a single lot, and this is a problem of ignorance on my part. I don't know if there's like some way when it gets subdivided to have a corner lot that gets a strip along Old Marlborough. That's part of a separate lot? No, that would not work. Okay.
It would always be frontage.
Okay.
It would never be a side yard setback.
No, I mean, there's no way to have the next lot over have a little strip that sticks out to prevent this one, the corner lot from actually having. No, it would not be allowed to be split in that manner.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so if you have a corner lot like that,
Mhm.
you couldn't stick a little strip onto the next yard over so that this one no longer had frontage.
We're going through site plan approval, so, and we don't have any intention of
So it wouldn't
dividing
be
the
split.
property up.
Well, so if it isn't being divided, then I'm not sure
I'll-
what the meaning of yard is.
I'll, for the project to move forward,
Yeah,
all 7 lots will be combined into a single lot.
right. Okay, so
So it
and
will be one corner lot with 2 fronts and 2 sides.
okay, so in that, but I'm still then unclear, no townhouse dwelling with a front yard.
But it should say with,
Because if
With
it's all
frontage.
one
With
lot,
frontage.
then there's no meaning to a dwelling having a front yard.
That was my side yard question too.
Okay,
Is where it has a side yard, that doesn't that imply different parcels?
yeah, if it's
And
just.
but if it's one parcel, does that mean you intend it to be 30 feet between buildings?
We're gonna have a building separation provision in here.
Into separate parcels?
No, we're not doing that. It's. more-
No, that's why I'm just
It's a
wondering,
big project. It's not individual lot.
That's why I was just trying to picture in my head what side yard meant, where it's really one parcel. So it's really just 30 feet from the sides,
Yes.
but nothing dictating what's in the middle of that. Fine, I just wanted
You
to
can
know.
imagine the rectangle, the front yards would be on Old Marlborough and Ornac.
Mhm.
And the side yards would be on the golf course driveway on the 10th fairway.
Okay, so that means if there's any townhouse dwelling at all with a front yard on Old Marlborough Road, then it can have no more than 3 units, as I read this.
yes.
Okay, it's,
The other ones were conceptually looking at 4, but they
Right.
would be on Ornac or the 10th
Okay.
fairway or over
Makes
towards the
sense.
golf course.
now that I understand what's intended, I could think about a different way
Great.
of saying it, but it's good to know what's intended. Now, in expressing the changes you mentioned under the next column, multi-unit dwelling, that the principal building shall not be closer than twice the height. But the language actually refers to the dwelling, not a principal building, and that could have simply been, you may have meant the dwelling when you were speaking.
I was talking about a different thing. I was talking about 7 to 12 to 2 associated accessory uses.
No, actually, under 7.12.4, you said the phrase principal building shall not be located, whatever it was, closer than twice the height. But that was probably because you reused the phrase from earlier.
And I
It
think
really
it's
means
it's
well.
one and the same,
Okay,
the multi-unit.
all right. Um. I'm not sure whether this counts as wordsmithing or substantive, but under 7.12.2.3, the language mentions necessary or medically necessary. And I have been trying to figure out how something can be medically necessary without being necessary. And there may be some jargony definition that I'm just not aware of. But I thought I would bring that to your attention so that you can think about it.
It's a definition I stole from another source, so it's statutory.
Oh, if it's statutory, okay, if
Yeah.
it was a non-statutory source,
Right.
then I would question there.
Right.
But statutory, I don't fight with.
Right, that's why none of us ever question the non-conforming nature of the structure when we're talking about, because the legislature said that, what does it mean?
And finally, under 7.12.9, third from last sentence, such landscaping shall at a minimum comply with the requirements of section 6.2.9. Now, section 6.2.9 says lot lines noted in table 3, but the dimensional requirements of this warrant article are not made in table 3, they're made directly in proposed section 7.12. So I think, Elizabeth, this is a question for you, or maybe even for town council, of whether that runs into the language in 7.12.1.1, whether, since it says something specific, it would override 6.2.9. That is to say, the dimensional front yard requirements would override 6.2.9. It sort of touches on 3 parts of this language. Oh, there was one more thing.
Well, so it says such landscape, so it's talking about the landscaping, such landscaping shall at a minimum comply with the requirements of 6.2.9.
Okay, and this,
And-
so I guess my problem is I was in a big rush to do this before the meeting, for lack of time. It's really that when I saw that, it made me wonder if the requirements in 7.12.4. No, that's not what it made me wonder.
Problem is the first point, 12.1.1 says it overrides all other zoning bylaws. And yet you.
Well, we're
prefer-
not
And I
there.
know what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
You're trying to say that you're gonna meet our site plan review for landscaping and stuff. But you basically negated that in that first paragraph.
Well, it says if in the event of a conflict, we're
Right.
saying there's not a conflict, there's a
Because
meeting
the-
of the lines of
Okay.
the landscaping and the standard to apply. So we're happy with 6.2.9. I think it might be the table reference that's confusing things because the table doesn't apply.
Oh, that's what it is. You say it must comply with the requirements of section 6.2.9.
Right.
But as I read 7.12.1.1, the requirements of section 6.2.9 literally say they don't apply to this article because they say they only apply to table 3. And this is not in table 3 in any way, shape, or form.
We can say notwithstanding the provision, 2.6.2.9, this landscaping standard will apply in the overlay district.
Or notwithstanding, let's say in table 3, this shall apply, so, okay. And, then the next 2 sentences go on to say, the planning board may adopt reasonable rules and regulations to govern the administration of this section. The submittals and permits under 7.12 shall be in addition to any requirements or. Those 2 sentences seem to apply to 7.12 as a whole and not just site plan review. And yet they're under site plan review So I was confused about what they were meant to apply to.
That's a good objection. I think the first one might apply to site plan review. If you want to adopt procedural rules for site plan review, here's your chance. The last sentence, I agree with you, doesn't apply to site plan.
Okay, so. This section, but only the site plan review one, but that does make sense.
So I'm not sure either sentence is needed.
Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah. I especially don't think the sentence regarding may adopt reasonable rules and regulations, because under section 712, under section 11.8 site plan review,
Yeah.
it already says they can adopt.
Huh,
re-
So why
re-
say it here? Yeah.
So it's not necessary. And the submittal and permits under 7 shall be in addition to any.
Are there any
So
submittals and permits?
there are no submittals or permits listed in 712.
So if you struck them both, that would,
Well, the middle of the site plan.
Right, but it already says in the first sentence that development under 712 requires site plan review under 11.8.
Unless I hear an objection, I'm gonna remove the last two sentences.
Works for me.
and then Elizabeth, I'll produce a slightly updated version of this, Elizabeth, for you to forward on to the applicants.
Yes.
That's, well, okay.
Linda.
Yeah, did you have anything else? Linda?
I think I'm fine. I can give you my little comments and, and then.
So the question is whether we support it or not?
No, the question is if we have individual comments before we get on to a broader discussion of whether we support it or not, right?
Right. Well, yeah, if there are any other additional comments or concerns.
That are substantive.
And then we open it up to public comments, yes. So are there any other substantive items that people want to discuss about the way this is worded before we move on to? No, I see, don't worry. I'm just making sure everybody on the board gets a chance to voice there. I got buried when you guys started flipping back and forth,
Yeah.
but I got it at the end. Okay.
So, just so I'm clear on this, by taking out, 7.12.8, the, the attainable units. Does that mean that in this project, there would be no attainable units like you have at Newburyport or at Deaconess currently? Instead, there'd be this contribution to a fund.
So, over the course of time, there very well may be,
Okay,
but there will not be on entry and on, original criteria, the nature of the CCRC is that the longer folks are members, the more likely and the greater that sort of need becomes. And so, a big part of the challenge was how do we handle this at the beginning and at the end, without sort of sinking the ship. And so, as time goes by, it would be unreasonable to think that there aren't any. But in terms of the way this is written and what's gonna be there on day one, that's, the plan is the contributions that we're making are what handle that on the front side. We still have the obligations of a CCRC.
which I believe is explained before is nobody is actually kicked out.
We have never kicked anybody out, so there's some theoretical possibilities where that can happen. We've never done that
For financial reasons.
for financial reasons, correct?
But it's
Health and
not written.
financials, a meaningful commitment to health and financial security for older adults is a big part of the underpinning of what a real not-for-profit CCRC is.
And it's the IRS ruling goes into this in detail. It has three obligations of a home. Back in 1972, they called it housing for the elderly. But it's housing, it's care, and it's financial stability. And they're equal obligations. It's not just one.
And we've made a proposal, a more conventional proposal, and did a number of drafts with the committee we worked with on that. Became clear that the preference was for the mitigation approach.
So I can give you.
When I say the preference, not our preference.
I can give you a little bit of, background as far as from the, the affordable housing perspective.
Okay.
It becomes exceedingly complicated and, I'm gonna say almost too complicated to try and insert what everybody understand is that standard affordable housing model of, 80% of area median
Mhm.
income. To, this example, because it's not just income, it's assets, and then it's over, over a period of time where, assets, get used and income, goes down but cost of care goes up. So, it just became almost impossible to try and put into words, into zoning, how that relationship and that calculation would even work from a zoning perspective, let alone from a monitoring perspective, from a reporting perspective, to, meeting fair housing, requirements to it just, there were a lot of people putting a lot of great minds and thinking to this, and, that's where, not trying to insert something into zoning, but, having the payment is part of the memorandum of agreement. It was just a better option, in my opinion, and, other housing professionals.
And is there a danger to setting a precedent here that we're allowing expansion of housing capacity without any sort of affordable clause to it?
Well, in a sense, there is, because the town has the choice to use all of the mitigation payment to obtain affordable housing elsewhere. Now, there are problems.
Is that what the
with-
fund goes to?
Well, it goes to that, or, healthcare, or the third thing, which I've momentarily forgotten.
Financial
And it's up to
Financial
the town
security.
to choose which of those uses and what proportion it would have. Now, there is an issue that, we don't want all the affordable housing over here and none of the affordable housing over there. There's also a question of if the town could figure out how, which from what Elizabeth says, could be very fraught. It could try to use the mitigation money to buy down units and then do development. Although we don't see how that would work.
Yeah, again, that's not,
Yeah,
That's
that's just
actually-
too difficult to figure it out. Yeah.
that's not even a possibility.
Yeah.
Cause you're talking about, basically, life contracts that, people enter into, so.
Yeah,
It's not just housing, it's services, so
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
complicated.
So,
it would be
do I think if this project builds, 150 units, is that gonna jeopardize the town as far as our affordable housing requirement?
Yeah, I'm not worried
no.
about that, yeah.
Yeah.
I
And it
don't.
might, but particularly if we chose to use none of the money for affordable housing, and that would be the town's choice.
That would be a breach of the agreement, so that's.
Well, no, if the town got the mitigation money and put all of it toward healthcare and
Oh,
the other one, and none of it toward affordable housing, well, that would be foolish of the town, but the town's choice.
it seems like it's outside the scope of.
Right.
what we're discussing here anyway.
Right.
It's fun.
We were reminded that we're, I think appropriately, that we're creating 150, just pick a number,
Hmm.
new units that are going into your denominator, so that
Yes.
the money could be used to address that issue.
Exactly my point. I'm more disturbed about the lack of an inflation provision than the idea of a mitigation fee, which seems pretty reasonable to me.
Well, we've done our research and taken the money over time and priced it, and we can make it work. There's.
That's for I think the town to ultimately decide whether that's the right call or not.
I'd also
Yeah.
be interested to hear what the housing groups had to say about it, but I'm sure we'll find out at town meeting.
So if we don't have anything specific, right, additional thoughts or comments from the board, I'll open it up for public comment before we have a final discussion.
I just have one.
Just your
question.
name and,
Oh, sorry,
Yep.
Jim Jackson, 44 Marlborough Road. We've been in discussions with Newburyport over several times, and one of the things that, we were told was. One of the things that we were told is that in the memorandum of agreement, there was going to be something about enhanced landscaping for screening, not only on Old Marlborough, but step screening to protect against the taller building. And I don't know, we have no knowledge of what is in the memorandum of agreement. We don't know if there's any language about landscaping there. It looks to me that the landscaping thing kind of has been put back into the zoning, which it wasn't previously because it was supposed to be in the memorandum of agreement. But this most certainly doesn't talk anywhere near anything about enhanced landscaping and potential screening for the big building. So I'm just trying to figure out where that is.
To my recollection, the landscaping issue was resolved by adding the language that we've already quoted, with regard to 6.2.9.
Well, we just read 6.2.9 and one of it says, 8 foot, trees.
But if I may, and I'm not sure what the process is here. I guess when I read this, Jim, it's exactly what we were talking about. Installation, the planning board may impose condition requiring installation of suitable landscaping along the property line to reduce the visual impact of the principal use, which is, any of the scale in the middle, upon adjacent properties by use of trees, shrubs, walls, fences, and other landscape elements. And then at a minimum, it references the bylaw, but that line, those first couple of lines in yellow, that's one of the.
That's
what
the
we added.
enhanced part.
That's what we added after, I forget which draft, but yeah.
Okay, so I guess the back end of that sentence that says that will at a minimum comply to what's there really takes the wind out of the sails of the rest of it. Because what they're saying is, okay, we'll at least put the 8 foot shrubs in. But it really doesn't talk about the enhanced landscaping and screening like we've talked about. So,
Well, I think everything but that last part.
correct,
does.
I agree.
Well,
I'm not
I would
sure.
say that it changes the word enhanced to suitable and that it makes people reliant on the due diligence and good faith of the planning board, because it depends on what the planning board shall consider suitable in whatever constitution of the planning board is in effect at the time this proposal may actually come up for site plan review, but it does give the planning board the option to go beyond section 6.2.9 and require more, a greater level of landscaping without requiring it from the planning.
When it say planning board may,
Yes.
that's where you're saying, hey, we could require more.
Yes, but the language of the zoning does not require the planning board to do so.
Ah, okay.
So the standard that you would apply in site plan approval is, the planning board obviously has to prepare a condition in this regard. The limit on that condition is that it can't be tantamount to denial of the project. That's how far their authority stretch. They can't impose a condition so draconian that we can't meet it and thus we don't have a project. But other than that, it's reasonable.
It seems to me that it's a bit of a gray area because there have been very few buildings of such size built in Concord, so there isn't much precedent. If there were lots of examples of the planning board not requiring extra screening beyond the minimum required for very large buildings, then a proponent could argue, well, why are you requiring more of us than you have for these similar projects? But in this case, there haven't been similar ones, so it's a gray area.
Elizabeth, I think you
So I'm gonna
Oh,
politely disagree.
okay, I'm wrong again.
No, I'm just gonna, so while, it's part of site plan review and the approval that the planning board goes through is in section 11.8, and it's specifically 11.8.5. And the findings that the board has to make from A to H. And under A, protection of adjoining premises against seriously detrimental uses for the provision of surface water drainage, site and sound buffers, and the preservation of view, light, and air is one of the findings. The planning board has and typically, in the past, required additional landscaping beyond 6.2.9 based on the type of project and the size of the project and the impact to abutters. I know there's one particular planning board member who really understands this when they built a new building that was taller than the residential abutters, and additional screening trees, not just an 8-foot hedge, but evergreens and deciduous trees was required. The planning board has also looked at that same with and the Board of Appeals, similar to the Novo Riverside Commons project, where the applicant went through and did an actual visual analysis of the existing trees and the height of those trees, and the height was a 5- and 6-story building, and how that was visually going to be screened or buffered by, it was existing landscaping. So it is always a conversation in every site plan application. To Mark's point, if this project comes through and the comment is, we want 50-foot tall trees planted along there, that is an unreasonable request for a project. The cost to plant a 50, spade and put in a 50-foot tree would be, an unreasonable condition under site plan review. But could the board require, a denser type of landscaping with a mix of different types of trees and evergreens that would provide some type of buffer and screening, not just, during the summer when the leaves are out, but also has some type of buffering of a type of tree that, yes, immediately when it's planted and the project is constructed, no, but 5 years, 10 years, 15, they continually grow and continually to, screen the project. So that is something that the board has consistently done over the past 20 years that I've been with the town.
An example of that type of analysis can be seen when the board reviewed Middlesex's new their 85-foot field house. And we actually did see,
It's not 85 feet.
No.
what is it?
It's like 40.
Oh, 45, sorry. It's
45
I drove by it the other day and I was like, whoa. But it does actually, because I went back and looked, it does match the visual renderings they gave us of views from the neighbors' houses. They had done, shadow casting over several times of year to confirm that this wasn't actually impacting neighbors and those kind of things. So those are sort of part of the standard process. And so, I guess with that, oh, sorry, go right ahead.
Zoe, Jim, Mark's Backus, 34 Old Marlborough Road, right across the street. So I wish you would explain things to me so that I'd be really happy that this would pass, but I think about loopholes and stuff like that. So one of you was asking about these setbacks, or 40 feet and 30 feet. And if you're confused by it, then imagine for me. So, well, let me Hopefully you can explain this to me in order that I and my neighbors will be able to understand.
Well, just to add clarity to my question was, when we see these types of setbacks. And it talks, those are basically the setbacks you would have, how close you can build to your neighbors, right? 30 feet from your neighbor's property line, this is how close your house can get. That's what, so I just wanted my own mental context of whether there was a plan to subdivide the property in some ways to add more lines that would create gapping between townhouse units, because in my mind, that's not what a townhouse is. I just wanted to make sure I was visually picturing what it was.
It's actually, thinking about Ms. Miller's questions.
Oh.
But ignoring that, let me just add, there's a front yard, a side yard, and a rear yard here. And there's an agreement that a 3-unit the max will be a 3-unit townhouse on Old Marlboro. So Jim told me that a front yard is like all sides of the building or something, and that doesn't really make sense to me, but if that's what it means, then I'm fine with going with that. But let's just say that this 3-unit townhouse across the street from me has its front yard, has its backyard facing me. Doesn't that mean it can be 15 feet from Old Marlboro?
No, so setbacks deal with, sides of a lot. They have nothing to do with the structure. So it has nothing to do with how the structure faces, has nothing to do with whether it's a structure's front door or back door.
Maybe abbreviate this. So anything facing me, the thing across the street from me is a lot, and its front yard is what's facing me. Yes, and that has to be 40 feet, has to be 40 feet back from there.
Correct. It has nothing to do with how the structure is positioned, whether it's how the front door that somebody comes in or whether somebody's coming in the back door. That side of that lot, that is considered a front yard. And the side that is on Ornac is also considered a front yard. This is a corner lot. It has 2 front yards.
But that means that every townhouse on the property will front on Old Marlboro because it will remain a single parcel. Correct?
No, it would be if on that lot, if there is a townhouse building that is adjacent to Old Marlboro Road, it will have to be 40 feet back from that property line.
I thought a lot and a parcel were the same thing, no?
It's the same thing.
But if there's only one lot, only one parcel, then any townhouse on the entire property will front on Old Marlboro.
Yes, it has to be 40 feet back from Old Marlboro.
Right.
That's so, and 40 feet back.
Behind it, it's gonna be more than 40 feet back.
Furthermore, that means that no townhouse dwelling of any kind shall contain more than 3 units. Is what I'm actually asking about.
The townhouse can contain 4 units if it's on Ornac, the 10th Fairway.
But what does it mean
or the
for
drive.
on Ornac if there's only one parcel?
On Old Marlboro.
Either one, they're all on Ornac and they're all on Old,
It's really a stretch.
no, it's a definitional question, for Elizabeth, I think, of what does it mean when there's only one lot with multiple buildings on it, in terms of what fronts or has frontage or it has a front yard or any other such term, don't they all?
But doesn't the standard only have to do with Old Marlboro and being back 40 feet from that road?
But it also says,
For the definition for front
No.
yards,
provided however that no townhouse dwelling with front yard on Old Marlboro shall contain more than 3 units. And so my question is, don't they all have a front yard on Old Marlboro because it's only one parcel?
So it would only be the first townhouse unit. the one next
And
to it,
remember that we've already contemplated changing that definition to with frontage on, not a front yard.
Right, but if I have, I can't remember where in the zoning bylaw it says if I have a lot, there's a building closer to a road and a building farther from the road, that only the further forward building fronts on it and the further backward doesn't. I understand there's a definition of principal versus accessory building, but I've never heard a definition of if there's two equal buildings, that one of them doesn't have frontage just because it's further behind the other one.
Well, that would,
so I'm gonna think about this, and this is why, no offense, do not like citizen petition zoning articles. But two, also do not like on the fly amending zoning articles.
Oh, yeah,
But so provided, however, that any townhouse dwelling. And give me a second,
probably within.
that is directly adjacent to Old Marlborough Road shall contain no more than 3 units.
It would simplify it to say that is within X feet. Of-
No,
Or, no?
well,
No,
it's
because
already gonna be, it already has to be 40 feet back. We're not talking about distance,
Okay.
we're talking about number of units in a structure.
Okay, I'm still not sure what directly means. We should take this offline.
However, that any townhouse that is directly adjacent to Old Marlborough Road is going to be a structure that's directly adjacent to Old Marlborough Road. The second structure over isn't directly adjacent to Old Marlborough.
Okay, but what if the road is here and there's one here and the other is next to it, but a hair back? If it's 3 feet further away from the road, is it no longer direct than the closer one? Is it now no longer directly adjacent?
I think the hair you're trying to split,
Uh-huh.
is so fine. The intent is clear. What,
It is. I agree. I just am having trouble with actually expressing the intent in a way that captures it.
Let me ask you a question. You're gonna have any renderings of what you're planning on building?
we've been working on it, but we don't have anything definitive to show.
Like even just a general arrangement drawing, like a plot?
It's not binding in any way.
No, but at least gives everyone a visual.
Well,
you
it
know?
does, but they can change the whole thing.
I get that, but at least it's a visual, right? That's what we're gonna do.
Now, how
That-
discussion.
I understand what you're suggesting, Rob, but also it gives somebody concrete. Instead of the concept and the zoning, you start to get into the nitty gritty.
That has backfired in the past
Yeah.
because people.
And-
don't like
and
the
people didn't like the
design.
design,
I don't
and
like the
it's
windows,
really
and
hard,
that's
and-
not what-
And Sue, I understand what your concern is, but I'm wondering if it's too fine a point, because when someone reads a zoning bylaw that says adjacent to and someone backs it up 3 feet, the reviewing authority is going to apply a reasonableness standard. So if they back it up 40 feet and put an extra story on it because it's 4 unit,
Yeah.
that's clearly okay, but 3 feet wouldn't be, and at some point, it's gray because it's not a building plan. And I think that's ultimately, like, this is a component of the negotiations with neighbors to determine what's appropriate, and at some point, I don't know if it can be perfect. And that's the hard part, because it's a
Yeah.
little squishy, I agree.
Mhm.
But, yeah, especially if it was multiple parcels, it would be.
so
easier.
so to your point, I do think.
It was my first question.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. So I do, as far as that, well, your first question was defining how, setbacks are measured from the lot frontage, and the property lines. It's not based on how the structure is located on the property, so, but for this section, I do think it does clarify at least, somewhat, to say that we are talking about, it is that a townhouse building that is directly adjacent to Old Marlborough Road will only have 3 units. The next one over can have 4.
Right.
I do not think it's possible to split that hair of site design, whether, one structure is located and the next one is just 3 feet behind it, but visually from Old Marlborough Road, visually, it is, it is still adjacent to Old Marlborough Road. If there's one and then beside it and visually from Old Marlborough Road, it is clearly not adjacent.
Yeah, Andrew made a good point about the controlling authority having to make that judgment and having the sense to do so.
Right, so, as part of site plan review, how the buildings are positioned on the lot. How the roads are laid out, how the sidewalks are laid out, the landscaping, the lighting, the parking, the stormwater drainage, all of that. If you look at all of those findings that the board has to make, those are all inherently part of the conversation because that all becomes a specific finding covered through A through H. Sustainability, emergency access, trash, deliveries. So all of that becomes part of that site plan review. I think we had another question.
Well, that led to another question, but let me parenthetically say that Jim, my neighbor, I was away on vacation, that there was an agreement that Newbury Court would not have a driveway onto Old Marlborough Road except for emergency access. And I did not hear that mentioned in any memorandum of agreement. And the imagining 4 or 5 active driveways across the street from Old Marlborough. I know you're gonna do a traffic study, but I'll tell you what the study will be in the morning. We have like 40 cars backed up going on to Route 2, so having a whole bunch of driveways there would be. But so this frontage, I think you kind of answered that, and conceptually I get it. But these lot line setbacks usually apply to lots, but there's only one lot. So does this now mean with front yard, side yard, rear yard that these are distances between units?
No.
Between dwellings?
No.
No, it doesn't. Oh.
No.
Oh, so they could have 5 townhouses that were 2 feet apart because none of these things I'm looking at.
I do not believe the building code would allow them to be 2 feet apart, but
Couldn't they be connected like a typical townhouse, however?
no.
Okay,
So, that's based on building code, I believe. It has to do with how many units, the type, and Rob can tell me if I'm wrong. The type of construction material used, what the exterior of the building is, the fire rating. So whether they have to be 10 feet apart or 15 feet apart, that's all building code requirements based on the type of construction. So this bylaw does not regulate interior, how the project gets laid out and whether they want the townhouse units to be 10 feet apart or 15 feet apart.
So these numbers.
Those
40
deal
feet,
with the
30
setbacks
feet,
from property lines.
15, totally that.
Mhm.
So that seems kind of, then why bother? Why not just say you're gonna
What's a lot of it's meant to protect you. A
protect
lot of
me?
it's meant to
So
preserve.
the setbacks deal with the setbacks from property lines. To protect,
Streetscape.
for
So there's
protection of
nothing in
abutters.
here restricting nothing in here restricting
how close or far apart the dwellings, have to be.
From each other,
I
correct.
mean, there are other laws about that, but, this whole thing seems really like, well, I would think it would confuse people at town meeting rather than clarify anything, because I'm reading it and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, they have to be 40 feet apart or 30 feet apart or. but
So there's nothing in the zoning bylaw dealing with how far apart two structures on somebody's private property has to be. That's governed by the building code.
But you see how confused I am by this, and you're gonna present this at town meeting. I don't even know why it's here.
We're trying to do something which is tasteful and which will basically stand the test of time, much like Newbury Court has stood the test of time for over 100 years. We're not gonna be putting buildings 3 feet from each other. That's the exact opposite of what we intend to do on the property.
Well, now you're arguing with my extreme case, so let's.
So-
Planning board will keep these.
Right, so, but
yes, we have.
I will say, you know, the zoning bylaw, under the zoning act deals with a town adopting, rules and regulations to, protect adjoining premises from different uses, protection of, views, light and air, to keep from overcrowding. So setbacks from property lines are to address those overriding zoning requirements and protection for abutting properties and protection from the public right of way or public, spaces. It does not deal with how somebody wants to develop their own private property, and whether you want to put your shed 20 feet from your house or whether you want to put your shed 10 feet from your house. That's not part of zoning. That's part of the building code. If you build a brick shed, a cement roof, brick building, the building code and the fire code is gonna say that has a fire rating that's much higher, and you can put that structure closer to your house if you want. If you build a straw shed, then the building code is gonna say, that needs to be further from your house because its fire rating is so much less. So that's different than what zoning is trying to protect.
With regard to the gentleman's question about access off Old Marlboro, that is still in the development, I'm sorry, the memorandum of agreement, and it says that the planning board may impose a condition limiting access to emergency only. In the alternative, the planning board may determine that non-emergency vehicles may enter the project, but they can't leave onto Old Marlboro. They'd have to navigate the internal site and pop out on Ornac, and that's for them to decide.
But
We assume.
We haven't seen that. We
We haven't seen it either.
I was sworn to secrecy during the
Yeah,
process at the
right.
select board.
So, but I can tell you that given, the length of the property's frontage along Old Marlboro, and from the intersection of Old Marlboro and Ornac, that, it is highly unlikely that even a right turn entrance from Old Marlboro into the site, is going to be something that through a traffic and safety study, would even be an option because of that likelihood of somebody coming from Ornac down Old Marlboro. Oh, I missed the entrance down on Old Marlboro. Here's another entrance, and making illegal, left-hand turns into the site. So, that's, and that's something that will be, addressed through that traffic and safety study, that they will hire a traffic engineer, to do that and provide that as part of the site plan review application. The planning board, as part of their, jurisdiction, hires an outside consultant traffic engineer to review that, to basically validate, all of the information that is presented.
So I'll try to wrap this up. from the perspective of the golf course. I know that Hornack and Old Marlboro, are frontage. What's the golf course signage? Is that a side yard or?
That
is
would be a,
rear yard?
that would be considered, the lot has 2 front yards. If it's all one lot, it would have 2 front yards and 2 side yards. And that's consistent in the zoning bylaw for any corner lot. Not just this property.
So then the rear yard line under 7.12.4 is irrelevant.
Currently, yes.
Okay,
If it's to be one lot, yes, it would be irrelevant.
can the owners request subdivision? Under the provisions of the CRCOG?
The property could not be developed as a continuing care with the multiple buildings if it were to be divided.
Yeah, even if they divided it and developed both, they just lose developable area. It just would make no
Correct.
sense.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so that line is simply irrelevant, but there's no harm having it.
Correct.
Hmm.
Anything else?
Great, was there another question?
You've answered.
Okay, and were there any questions from the public online? I didn't see any hands up, but sometimes I can miss it.
Oh, there's Stuart.
Stuart Cressel, oh, it's locked up.
Yes.
Oh, give me 1 second. Sorry, I gotta. There you go. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, for some reason, my camera is having trouble working. Stuart Crucell, 60 Emerson Road. Actually, you just had 2 questions, one sort of procedural. At the start of it, you said that the MOA, whatever it's gonna be, would be before the public, before the town meeting. I'm just curious about the timing of that. Is that like 5 minutes before? Is it days before? Is it a question of when it gets signed, et cetera? And then the second question is, if there's any agreement with the golf course, is that also going to be made public for the town meeting?
So I can tell you that I do not know when the MOA will be finalized and provided. That it's still a conversation between New England Deaconess and the select board. I do not imagine it's within anybody's interest to have that become available 5 minutes before, town meeting. I would hope that today's only Tuesday, that it'll be finalized this week, so that it's available before the start of town meeting on Monday. Which, as I stated earlier, I do believe the town moderator is going to announce, it's indicated to me that this article will be pre-scheduled for 6:45 on Wednesday, June 4th. As far as it being signed, it would not be executed with the select board unless this article passes. The agreement, whatever agreement New England Deaconess has with the golf course, that's a private civil matter, and the town is not a party to that. The select board's memorandum of agreement is and will be a public document, so it is required to be made available outside of executive session when the parties agreed. But the agreement with the golf course does not need to be made public.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If there's nobody else, we'll turn it back to the committee itself and have the board, committee board, to have our determination of, and discussion. So, I mean, we've kind of not belabored it, but we've discussed this a lot. So I guess the question then becomes, do we feel, whether we have to vote, whether we recommend affirmative action, no action, or take no position? I guess if no one has any other thoughts or comments, do people have any other thoughts or comments they would like to discuss of what they think? Before I
think we should support the project. That's my opinion.
I generally do as well. I see it as even, I don't love the lack of affordability associated with it, but understand why it's not something that can be boiled down to pure writing. I appreciate that there seems to have been significant public outreach since the last time we had this discussion, and then other neighbors come in, which is great. And I'm generally supportive of more housing, even if it's not perfect, it's more, and that's kind of what we need right now.
The overlay is sort of a weird
Mechanism.
nebulous thing, I guess, okay? It isn't quite as concrete as what we're used to dealing with, okay? But I think we have to take it at its face value of what they're trying to accomplish, okay? It's a big project, okay?
Yeah, I would be in support of this. It seems like the setbacks for the total buildings, it definitely responding to what the neighbors were concerned about. I would like to sit down and figure out the numbers. It may be that more people will benefit from the mitigation fee. Did I get that right? That there may be more elders who benefit than if there were elders who could get cheaper apartments in the project, so.
I would agree. I think it's a very good use of the land. With a proven developer, which we don't always get to see.
Proven
And an operator, as well. I think that, having gone through the MBTA, situation, and, you know, I know that, there's resistance to greater density in town, but I think that the applicant has made a good faith effort to work with the town and the abutters to mitigate that. And I think that my only regret is that we'll be encouraging more citizens petitions and overlay districts. But since
Hopefully.
I'm leaving the board, that's down to the next smarter generation.
Oh, but there is a rationale for this being an overlay district. I
People to figure it out that.
Yes, I think
Oh.
so.
Well,
agree completely.
From a zoning perspective, a basic rationale for an overlay district is that, you know, if something catastrophic, happened with New England Deaconess, and they were to sell this property,
Oh, it could still be the original.
it could,
Yeah.
somebody could come in and say, you know what? We're not a continuing care, retirement community. We can't meet the obligations that New England Deaconess has agreed to through this memorandum of agreement. But we're gonna buy the property and revert it to 7 single-family dwellings.
Right.
So the zoning,
Okay,
underlying zoning does stay in place.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Right,
But-
but as opposed to, if it had been rezoned for multifamily use. Then, they could just turn around and sell it to a developer to put up a vastly different project. And they can't do that in this instance.
Well, it
So I
could have
think
been-
it has, from the outset, shown some regard for the community and, reasonable options for this piece of land.
It could have been rezoned to be only a continuing care community, but Elizabeth makes a good point that this allows the current zoning to remain in force if something goes wrong with that project, which I hope not.
Or if they decide, I mean, we would have had those initial questions that we did, what happens if they decide just to flip it? you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And in this instance, they could, but it would become 7 single family homes, not anything else.
Well, but they
Could be.
didn't have to rezone it for pure multifamily. It could have been only for a continuing
Yeah,
care.
this is, regardless,
But
this
it
is what's in
doesn't-
front of us.
yeah,
Yeah.
And it does actually make sense.
Right.
to rezone it as an overlay.
So with that, I guess we just need a vote of whether we want to take an affirmative position. What?
So I wanted to comment, well, first of all, I think the motion needs some work. And, because I personally am completely in support of the idea of this project. I think it's great. I want to make sure that that's what the zoning actually, specifies, and that we don't have mistakes in it. And second of all, we haven't seen the memorandum of understanding yet. So
Agreement.
Oh,
agreement. So I wonder, if we could be a little bit more fine-grained about our support. I personally would rather say
We can
something along
wait.
the lines of, I support the zoning, but with the understanding that we have not seen.
well, no, this would be read in front of town meeting, right? Isn't that the thought? So
Right.
we
So-
should just wait.
So the board's motion that's printed in the briefing book is that you've deferred your recommendation to town meeting.
Well, I'm kind of
So-
suggesting that we keep doing that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I forgot that we have.
So at town meeting, you know, the board can confer at town meeting and after seeing the memorandum of agreement and seeing the final motion with the proposed amendments to the article and can vote at town meeting.
Okay.
So you don't need to.
We don't need to do
take
anything
action.
right now.
Sounds like a plan.
That's a good plan. We'll do that.
Well, we will have to make an arrangement for when and where we're meeting before town meeting, but we
No,
can do that.
So the planning board
Oh,
has
we can
the
just
ability
add it
to
in our
confer
seats. Yeah,
during
yeah.
town meeting.
Okay, yes,
So you will have a table
yes.
that's up front where everybody sits
Thursday night.
Wednesday night.
Awesome. Okay. Great, thank you. Coming. And with that, we'll move on to the next.
Yes, we'll see an email from me with comments from Linda and Sue, and then, I will, since I'm out Thursday, Friday, Monday.
Yeah, I think,
So-
I need to get Nina involved a bit in terms of the timing of the select board signatures, hours. My past, experience is that this is signed before you go.
That may be true.
And there is a provision in the MOA that says that if the zoning is passed and there's an exhibit, which is the zoning that we've attached, without material change, then these obligations will go forward as a covenant running with the land. So I just want to make everybody aware that there's a built-in double veto. If they're not happy and we're not happy,
Right.
then the whole thing just blows up.
Mhm.
We don't want that to happen, obviously.
Could I just ask super quick, are there dissenting voices we haven't heard yet? Outside of, yeah,
Just largely based on, I couldn't possibly make a determination without seeing the memorandum of agreement. That's, I mean, it's just. That's the lawyer in me. It's like, I'm not gonna say yes or no to anything until I look at the whole thing. I have reservations about this as a tool. I don't have reservations about the underlying project. But using overlay districts to accomplish it this particular way, it's novel for us in this type of application. So whenever we have a novel application of a type of zoning in town, I'm always gonna be very cautious about that. So without having the whole picture, I would possibly do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, so.
Thanks, Will.
thank you.
Thank you, great. Good luck.
Thank you.
The next item we have on our agenda is, planning board liaison appointments for 2025, 2026.
You have a bunch. You also have two new members starting on the 17th. Alan Bogosian is the current chair of the Sanford Historical Commission. And Greg Dorothy, who is a member of the West Concord Advisory Committee, have been nominated and I believe have been appointed. So they will start. But at this time, what the select board really needs the planning board to do is to put forth, your designee member for the land use working group. Because that group wants to, get going and get started. So that is a one-year term with a potential, extension of the group's charge by the select board. So that's between the five of you. And you have the Community Preservation Committee, which, Sue has served the last 2 years on that committee.
What is the customary length of time that a planning board member serves on the CPC? What was that, 1 year, 2 years?
It's a 1 year, it's a 1 year appointment.
It is. I was just wondering what has been the custom of the planning board in terms of,
There's
Length of
been,
service.
yeah, there's been no
Okay.
set,
Hmm.
as I do think, rotating that position every year is a challenge, because it can be a lot and, complicated, so, but that is the option. There's been no set, policy or rule. Then, Mark has been, going to the Hanscom Field Advisory Committee, which I did find out, that is a designee member by the select board, not the planning board,
Yeah,
so.
it's removed from that. You know. I'm no longer on the Hampton Field Advisory Board. I still participate. Yeah.
So the conversation comes down, and I think Mark provided his insight, whether the planning board should have a liaison to that or not, whether it's beneficial for the planning board to be actively monitoring that, or whether, that's a liaison that can be given up.
It used to be a really boring assignment until that whole Northfield project. Okay, and then it got,
Yeah.
in the forefront. It doesn't appear that the Northfield project is gonna happen. It's still, in the works, but it just, I don't think it's gonna happen. So I really don't think it's worth anybody's time. I think somebody should be on it so they get the reports. The reports are interesting. It shows flights in and out and all that stuff, okay? But for the most part, the meetings are about people complaining about the noise. And there's nothing that can be done about the noise. That's all FAA, guidelines. Nobody likes it. If they fly over the back of my house on Sunday afternoons, I do most people, but that's life. There's nothing we can do about that. The biggest thing that I did was that I looked at the fuel taxes that we get, because we get taxes out of there. And we were getting like $400,000 a year from Hanscom Field, us alone. Should have been like 4 million, okay, based upon the amount of fuel that gets used there and the cost of fuel. So they're doing an audit on that now, but we got no report. We're getting this money and nobody knew anything about where it was coming from.
Free money.
It was nuts, okay, crazy. Nobody, most people in town didn't even know that we were getting this money, okay? So, anyway.
But that's not a planning board issue per se.
No, I don't think it's worth it. I think we have other things to worry about, okay, but my 2 cents.
And then the next is just a liaison to the different housing groups. And I think, part of this may be just, being in touch with the different housing groups, and, they have the quarterly housing roundtable. There's the Climate Action Committee, the Transportation Advisory Committee, then liaison to the Select Board, West Concord Advisory Committee, Economic Vitality Committee, 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force. Then there's the Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination. So that's the Magic Subregion from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And then we had our built-in liaison to the MCI Advisory Board, but whether the planning board feels that with Linda going off the board, whether another board member should be being a liaison to that board. I do think that from my perspective is a critical liaison as the advisory board moves from visioning into zoning development.
So let me ask you a question. What's the difference between that and the land use? You know, aren't they kind of overlapping a little bit because MCI is part of their charter, isn't it?
No.
Oh, it's not?
I
I thought
don't-
it was.
I
Maybe I misread the article today.
I
Oh, yeah, today.
I don't think
More
so.
encompassing than MCI.
I know it is.
Yeah,
I'm
is
saying-
it on the matrix?
It's on the matrix of
Thank you.
potential properties.
The matrix, and I'm sure it will be discussed. The thing is that the town doesn't own the
Yeah,
property.
yeah.
It's owned by the state and it will probably not ever own the property. However, but zoning will be very important.
Okay.
So, there's not a whole lot that can be done with the matrix, I don't think.
Yeah.
I must have misread
So
the
I
But
think-
article.
it has to be
Right,
considered.
Yeah, I think the
considered.
land use working group is starting with the, the initial premise of looking at different you know, land options to address public works needs, emergency services needs, and then, going, from there. And so I mean, I'm sure there's gonna be a little bit of overlap with the, potential for those needs to be accommodated physically on the MCI Concord property. But I think for the MCI Concord Advisory Board, it's going to be critical that the board stay in touch with the conversations as it starts to lead up to zoning. Because while I don't see the planning board, similar to the other zoning articles where you're doing the public outreach, you're, doing the drafting, I don't see the board doing that. That will be part of still the advisory board working with a consultant. But I do see the planning board having a very active role in those conversations. But it's not realistic to think that all 7 members are going to be going to every MCI advisory board. So I think that's where it's going to be a liaison who is looking at the agendas and saying, hey, they're talking about, zoning, and then reporting back.
Shouldn't you wait until you get the new members on board to assign these things?
I do, except for the land use
Yeah.
working group,
Right.
and the MCI advisory board. I don't think that's a new member.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Neither
disagree.
one of those are
Yeah.
new member things.
Right.
So, I mean,
I'll tackle one of them. Could do land use or the other, depending on if someone else wants to do MCI or the other.
I'll do whatever the board would like me to do. I mean, I'd love to do MCI considered land use, but I also, they're heavy lifts and, my time is short these days, but, that the CPC or any other committee that the board would like me to take, I will.
I wouldn't mind doing the CPC. I did it 1 year and then didn't after.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm happy to do that one. And then it's,
You wanna
Those are
decide
the-
who you're gonna give money out to, something like that?
Yeah.
It's sort of.
it's interesting. I mean, it's completely like, for someone with no budget discretion.
It's almost
really,
funny
it's kind of
money
nice to
that's
be
out
like,
So if you do CPC and you do land use, then you do MCI,
Okay,
is that
Does
what
that work?
everybody's seen?
unless somebody else would, which would be.
unless you're or Heather.
Abby.
I'd be interested in it, but I feel like I need a little more time on the board.
Well, you can both go until you
I can
feel-
definitely
yeah,
go, that's
until you
true.
feel you could be.
Okay.
I would be interested in the Economic Vitality Committee if that's going to continue to be something that the planning board wants to. Cause Linda, you're going off the.
Stepping back.
Stepping back.
Yeah, the ghost of Miller will not be haunting. Okay.
Sentence is over.
so what I can do is, I can take this chart, just add those 3 things, and then, at your meeting on June 17th, with a reminder, you're starting at 6:30, because you have a workshop for the combined, for the mixed use. Workshop is on June 17th, starting at 7. So you're meeting at 6:30, so you can do a very quick site plan. Parking lot at 290 Baker Ave. Yeah, and so maybe you can finish out your liaisons at that point.
Because at that point, the new members will be officially
Yes,
on board as
will
well.
be officially on board.
Well, you were late getting,
Hello.
yeah, we did that,
Okay,
went real quick.
I figured.
Okay, and then the next item we have is liaison and town planner updates.
Well, yeah, when I read that, I think they started construction.
Anything else to update us on?
No, I don't.
Wasn't it enough?
Well, the MCI community,
Oh,
event is tomorrow or online on Thursday evening. So you, this will be looking at the various scenarios and commenting on which people might want to take forward or giving feedback on probably all of them.
So this is different than the prior event?
I hope so.
yes.
I mean, I
So
think
this,
wasn't
this,
clear to me.
yeah,
it's,
so the prior event was to get public input on,
Okay.
and values on, and, different options and uses, and so they, and then all the other public comment that the consultant has pulled together and the advisory board has received. They've pulled that information together and come up with different use scenarios.
Okay.
Land use scenarios for the property and getting feedback on those different scenarios, which is designed to help inform how to move forward with zoning.
it's really a little bit of, how much commercial use, how much housing, how much use, municipal use, and really is kind of the mix. And because at the end result has to be economically feasible. And that's the big juggling act.
Yeah. And this is tomorrow night, right?
And there's, it's at Giroux, as long as it doesn't rain, and
Three
it's
to
3 to 5,
3 to 5.
and then another session from 6 to 8. And it's informal, so you don't have to be there at 3. There's not gonna be like a presentation and so on. It will be similar, I believe, in terms of
It's kiosks.
kiosks and input, and such. There's not been a run through, so I really don't know. And then, but then the next night, there's a Zoom. Cause so many people just can't get there.
Yeah.
From, I believe, 7 to 8. And that, hopefully all of that's on that town calendar.
That's nothing.
Awesome. And then the last thing is election of officers. So, we need a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk out of the 5 of us who are still on the board.
Sorry.
No worries. So do we have a volunteer for chair?
Take it, we talked about it.
I don't like the words in people's mouths. Right.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much.
And then our vice chair,
Sure.
and do we have a clerk?
I'm willing unless, the clerk's job is a very light load, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think I need more time on the committee. That's.
I don't believe the clerk does.
You can-
anything.
In name only.
But in the event that neither the chair or the vice chair show up one night.
Well, then it's definitely,
Okay, I'll do it.
Awesome.
I'll do it.
Do we need votes on that, or do we wait, or what's the-
So generally, for the clerk, we send the draft meeting minutes.
Right.
To you, and, you know, we send them to Sue.
But I'm still gonna ask for them to be.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so,
So then I should do
that's-
this, Sue should do this.
No, you should do it.
That's fine, that's fine.
okay,
Awesome.
so you actually do need.
Do we need to vote for
somebody,
each one or?
No, somebody can
nominate a
nominate the
slate?
slate.
Okay, I nominate a slate of Rob for chair, Abby for vice chair, and Pat for clerk.
Second.
And then all those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. And that is the last item on our agenda, so thank you all for coming.